In the shadowed corridors of Kensington Palace, where whispers carry more weight than crowns and family bonds shatter like ancient china, a single piece of paper held the power to heal a kingdom's deepest wound. For 3 years, two brothers had walked separate paths through the same royal maze, their childhood laughter now replaced by the deafening silence of unspoken pain. But, on this rain-soaked Tuesday in November, as autumn leaves fell like tears outside the palace windows, Prince William's trembling hands would make a choice that would echo through history. The letter, written in Charles's careful script and sealed with desperate hope, contained words that could bridge the chasm between a father and his younger son. Words of apology, of understanding, of love that had never truly died despite the public storms and private betrayals. It was meant to be Harry's lifeline back to the family he had left behind in pursuit of his own truth. But, sometimes, the very people we trust to deliver salvation become the architects of our destruction. What happens when the guardian of peace becomes its destroyer? When love turns to ash in the hands of those sworn to protect it? This is the story of how one brother's desperate attempt to control fate would burn the very bridge that could have brought his family home. The November rain drummed against the tall windows of Kensington Palace with the persistence of an unwelcome memory. Prince William stood in his private study, the weight of 3 sleepless nights evident in the dark circles beneath his eyes. The room, usually his sanctuary, felt suffocating today. Family photographs lined the mahogany shelves, but his gaze deliberately avoided the ones featuring his younger brother Harry, their smiles now feeling like relics from a different lifetime. Charles had called that morning, his voice carrying the tremor that had become increasingly common since the cancer diagnosis. The conversation replayed in William's mind like a broken record. His father had written a letter, he'd explained, a deeply personal message meant for Harry. It contained everything Charles had struggled to say publicly, the apologies he'd rehearsed in sleepless nights, the admissions of his failures as a father during those turbulent years after Diana's death. "I need you to ensure Harry receives this," Charles had said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't trust the usual channels. Too many people, too many opportunities for it to be leaked or intercepted. This must come from family to family." William had agreed without hesitation, as he always did when his father's health was concerned. The responsibility felt both natural and burdensome. Since becoming the Prince of Wales, William had grown accustomed to carrying the weight of family diplomacy on his shoulders, but this felt different. This was personal in a way that made his chest tight with anxiety. The letter arrived by special courier just after lunch. It came in a simple brown envelope, sealed with red wax bearing the Prince of Wales feathers. William's personal assistant, James Morrison, had brought it directly to his study, understanding instinctively that this was not ordinary correspondence. The envelope felt heavier than its physical weight suggested, as if it carried years of unspoken words and missed opportunities. William dismissed James and locked the study door behind him. The silence that followed felt profound, broken only by the continued patter of rain and the distant murmur of palace life continuing its ancient rhythms. He held the envelope up to the light, noting his father's careful handwriting on the front, "For Henry Charles Albert David Windsor, from a father's heart." The formality of Harry's full name struck William as both touching and heartbreaking. It was as if Charles was reaching back to the innocent boy Harry had once been, before the weight of royal duty and public scrutiny had driven a wedge between them all. William remembered that boy, the mischievous prince who had brought laughter to even the most solemn royal occasions, whose infectious energy had been both his greatest gift and his eventual downfall within the rigid structure of royal life. Sitting at his desk, William stared at the envelope for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. The seal remained unbroken, but his mind raced with possibilities about its contents. He knew his father had been deeply affected by Harry's departure from royal duties, by the explosive interview with Oprah, and by the ongoing media circus that seemed to follow every move either brother made. Charles had aged visibly in the years since Harry and Meghan's dramatic exit, the stress etching deeper lines around his eyes and adding a fragility to his movements that concerned everyone who knew him. The relationship between the three men had become a complex web of love, duty, resentment, and regret. William often found himself caught in the middle, trying to balance his loyalty to his father and the crown with the memories of growing up alongside Harry, of facing their mother's death together, of supporting each other through the unique challenges of royal life. But, somewhere along the way, that support had transformed into competition, understanding had become judgment, and brotherhood had fractured under the pressure of expectation and difference. William's phone buzzed, interrupting his contemplation. A text from Catherine: "How are you holding up? The children are asking when Uncle Harry might visit again." The innocence of his children's question cut deep. George, Charlotte, and Louis remembered their uncle as the fun-loving prince who would arrive with gifts and stories, who would play football in the garden and teach them card tricks during family gatherings. They didn't understand the complex web of adult grievances that had transformed their uncle from a frequent visitor into a distant memory. Another buzz, this time from his private secretary: "Your Royal Highness, the courier service has confirmed they're ready for the package to California. Shall I arrange the pickup for this afternoon?" The efficiency of it all struck William as both impressive and, somehow, wrong. Here was a system that could deliver a letter across the world in a matter of hours, yet couldn't seem to bridge the emotional distance between family members who had once shared everything. William set the phone aside and walked to the window. The gardens of Kensington Palace stretched out below, their autumn colors muted by the gray sky. He could see the exact spot where he and Harry had once buried a time capsule, convinced that future archaeologists would be fascinated by their collection of Pokémon cards and candy wrappers. The memory brought a rare smile to his face, followed immediately by a sharp pang of loss for what they had become. The weight of leadership pressed down on him more heavily these days. As heir apparent, every decision he made was scrutinized not just for its immediate effects but for its long-term implications for the monarchy. His father's illness had accelerated his preparation for kingship, adding urgency to responsibilities he had always known would one day be his. In quiet moments like this, the magnitude of it all could feel overwhelming. But it was more than just the crown that weighed on him. William genuinely missed his brother. He missed the easy camaraderie they had shared, the way Harry could make him laugh until his sides ached, the comfort of having someone who truly understood the unique pressures of their position. The public saw their disagreement as a political or personal rivalry, but William experienced it as a profound grief, the loss of his closest companion and confidant. The letter represented hope, but it also represented risk. William knew that any communication between Charles and Harry would be dissected by media outlets around the world. Every word would be analyzed for hidden meanings, every gesture interpreted as either progress or failure in the family's reconciliation efforts. The pressure to get this right felt enormous, not just for the family but for the institution they represented. As the afternoon light began to fade, William made his decision. He would read the letter first. Not to censor or control its contents, but to understand what his father was trying to communicate. If Charles was extending an olive branch, William needed to know how far that branch reached and whether it was strong enough to support the weight of all their collective mistakes. He told himself it was about protecting his father from potential disappointment, about ensuring that Harry would receive the message in the spirit it was intended. With careful precision, William used a letter opener to break the red wax seal. The envelope opened cleanly, revealing several sheets of cream-colored paper covered in his father's distinctive handwriting. As he unfolded the first page, William could almost hear his father's voice speaking the words, could picture him laboring over each sentence in his study at Highgrove, surrounded by the watercolor paintings and organic gardens that brought him peace. The opening lines took his breath away. "My dearest Harry, I write to you not as a king to his subject, or even as a father to his son, but as a man who has made mistakes to another man who deserves better." William's hands trembled slightly as he continued reading, his father's vulnerability laid bare in elegant script across the pages that followed. The words on the page seemed to burn themselves into William's memory as he continued reading. Charles had laid himself completely bare, admitting to failures that William had never heard him acknowledge aloud. The letter detailed the loneliness Charles had felt in the years following Diana's death, his struggle to balance being a single father with his royal duties, and his growing realization that he had failed to protect his sons from the very system he was meant to prepare them to lead. "I failed to see how the institution I served so faithfully was slowly suffocating the very qualities in you that made me most proud," Charles had written. "Your compassion, your desire to speak truth regardless of consequence, your unwillingness to accept that this is how things have always been done as an acceptable answer to human suffering." William paused, setting the letter down with shaking hands. These were not just words of apology, they were admissions that cut to the heart of everything the royal family represented. Charles was acknowledging that the system itself might be flawed, that the sacrifices demanded of them all might not always be justified by the greater good they claimed to serve. The next section focused on Meghan, and William found himself holding his breath as he read his father's words about the woman who had become such a polarizing figure in their family's story. Charles wrote with painful honesty about his initial reservations, not because of her race or background as the media had often suggested, but because of his fear that she wouldn't understand the unique pressures of royal life until it was too late to prepare her properly. "I see now that my hesitation to fully embrace Meghan was not protection but prejudice," the letter continued. "Not racial prejudice, as some have claimed, but the prejudice of a man so trapped within his own circumstances that he could not imagine a different way of doing things. She brought fresh perspective to our family, challenged assumptions I had never questioned, and loved you with a fierce protectiveness that reminded me of your mother's love for both of you." William's chest tightened at the mention of their mother. Diana's presence hung over all their family dynamics like a beautiful ghost, her memory both inspiring and haunting in equal measure. Charles had never spoken so openly about the parallels between Diana and Meghan, but William could see them now with uncomfortable clarity. Both women had struggled against the constraints of royal life, both had sought to use their platform for causes they believed in, and both had ultimately chosen paths that put them at odds with the institution. The letter went on to address specific moments of conflict, incidents that had been reported in the press but never fully understood by the public. Charles wrote about the disagreement over Archie's security detail, admitting that his refusal to provide the same level of protection offered to other royal children had been based more on political considerations than genuine security assessments. He acknowledged that this decision had forced Harry into an impossible position between protecting his son and maintaining his royal role. "I chose the institution over my grandsons," Charles wrote, "and, in doing so, I chose protocol over love. This is a mistake I will carry with me for the rest of my days, however many or few they may be." The reference to his mortality made William's throat constrict. The cancer diagnosis had been kept largely private, shared only with immediate family members and a small circle of trusted advisors. While the treatment was progressing well, the experience had clearly forced Charles to confront his own limitations and regrets with new urgency. As William continued reading, he found himself experiencing an unexpected range of emotions. Relief that his father was finally acknowledging truths William had long suspected. Anger that these admissions were coming so late, after so much damage had been done. Fear about what this level of vulnerability might mean for the monarchy's stability if it ever became public. And, underneath it all, a growing sense of unease about his own role in the family's dysfunction. Charles wrote about William too, praising his dedication and sense of duty while also expressing concern about the burden of expectation placed on his shoulders. "I see you struggling with the weight of being everything to everyone," the letter read, "the perfect heir, the loyal son, the bridge between old and new. But I wonder sometimes if we have asked too much of you, if in preparing you to lead, we have forgotten to let you simply be." The observation was painfully accurate. William had spent his entire adult life trying to be the steady, responsible presence the family needed, especially as Harry's relationship with royal duty became increasingly fraught. He had absorbed criticism, mediated conflicts, and sacrificed his own preferences for the sake of family unity. But reading his father's acknowledgement of this sacrifice brought no satisfaction, only a profound exhaustion. The most devastating section of the letter dealt with the period immediately following Harry and Meghan's wedding. Charles described watching his younger son's joy during those early months of marriage, seeing him more relaxed and confident than he had been in years. He wrote about the hope he had felt that Harry had finally found his place within the royal framework, only to watch that hope slowly crumble as the pressures mounted and the support systems failed. "I should have fought harder for you both," Charles admitted. "When the media turned vicious, when the palace machinery seemed designed to grind rather than protect, when the very people meant to support you began to see you as problems to be managed rather than family to be cherished. I should have been your shield, not your burden." William found himself remembering those months with painful clarity. He had watched from the sidelines as his brother's marriage became a lightning rod for cultural and political tensions far beyond anything Harry and Meghan could control. The coverage had been relentless and often cruel, but the family's response had been to maintain traditional protocol rather than adapt to unprecedented circumstances. The letter's tone shifted in its final pages, becoming more forward-looking and hopeful. Charles wrote about his dreams for the future, his desire to meet Archie and Lilibet properly, his hope that the family might find a way to honor both tradition and change. He outlined ideas for how Harry might maintain his royal connection while living his chosen life, suggesting flexible arrangements that had never been seriously considered during the crisis years. "I do not ask you to return to a life that brought you pain," Charles wrote near the end. "I ask only that we might find a way forward that honors your truth while maintaining our connection as father and son, as grandfather and grandchildren, as human beings who share blood and love despite our failures to show it properly." The letter concluded with a request for a private meeting, away from media scrutiny and palace protocol. Charles suggested Balmoral in the spring, when the estate was at its most beautiful and peaceful. He promised that only family would be present, no advisors or staff beyond what was necessary for basic security and comfort. "Bring Meghan, bring the children," the final paragraph read. "Let us try to build something new from the pieces of what we broke. Let us give your mother's grandchildren the chance to know their grandfather not as a king or a prince, but as the man who loves them simply because they exist." William set the letter down on his desk and walked to the window again. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained gray and heavy with unfulfilled promise. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, and he was surprised by what he saw. Instead of the composed prince he worked so hard to project, he saw a man wrestling with impossible choices. The letter was everything Harry had said he wanted, everything the family needed to begin healing. It was vulnerable, honest, and generous in ways that Charles had never been publicly. But it was also dangerous. If this level of admission ever became public, it would reshape the entire narrative around the royal family's recent troubles. It would validate many of Harry's claims while potentially destabilizing the very institution Charles had spent his life serving. William's phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. The caller ID showed his father's private number. For a moment, William considered letting it go to voicemail, but duty won out over uncertainty. "William?" Charles's voice carried across the connection with unusual urgency. "Have you had a chance to review the letter?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. William realized his father must have been waiting by the phone, anxiety eating at him as the hours passed. "Yes, I've read it," William replied carefully, his voice betraying none of the emotional turmoil the letter had unleashed. "And?" Charles pressed. "Do you think it strikes the right tone?" "I've rewritten it 17 times over the past month. I wanted to be honest without being destructive, vulnerable without being weak." William closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the moment settling around him like a heavy cloak. His father's desperation was palpable, and it broke something inside him to hear the man who had always seemed so certain of his path now seeking validation for what was clearly the most important letter of his life. "It's very honest, Papa," William said, using the childhood name that still felt natural despite all the years and formality that had accumulated between them. "Perhaps more honest than might be wise." The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably long. When Charles finally spoke, his voice was smaller, more fragile. "You think I shouldn't send it?" William stared out at the gardens where he and Harry had once played, where they had dreamed of adventures and futures that seemed limitless. The weight of the decision before him felt crushing. Send the letter, and potentially destabilize the monarchy with admissions that could be weaponized by critics and enemies. Don't send it, and watch his father carry this regret to his grave while the family remained fractured beyond repair. "I think," William said slowly, "that you should consider what happens after Harry reads this. If he shares it with Meghan, if they discuss it with their advisors, if any part of it ever becomes public. The institution you've served your entire life could be permanently damaged by the very honesty that might heal our family." Charles was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, there was a tremor in his voice that had nothing to do with age or illness. "Perhaps the institution needs to be damaged a bit. Perhaps that's the only way it can grow strong enough to survive in a world that no longer accepts blind deference to tradition." The words hit William like a physical blow. His entire life had been built around the assumption that protecting the monarchy was the highest good, that personal sacrifice in service of the crown was not just noble but necessary. To hear his father questioning those fundamental principles felt like watching the ground shift beneath his feet. "You don't mean that," William said, but even as the words left his mouth, he wasn't sure he believed them. "Don't I?" Charles replied. "William, I'm 75 years old. I've spent my entire life preparing to be king, and, now that I am, I find myself wondering what the point of it all is if it costs us our humanity. What good is a crown that requires us to sacrifice our children on the altar of public image?" William sank into his desk chair, the letter still spread before him like evidence of some terrible crime. The man on the other end of the phone sounded nothing like the king who had delivered his first address to the nation with such dignity and composure just over a year ago. This was a father, broken by the loss of his son and desperate to find a way back to love. "The courier is standing by," Charles continued. "But I won't send this without your blessing. You'll be dealing with the consequences of my choices long after I'm gone. If you think this will make your future reign more difficult, we can find another way." William looked down at the letter again, at his father's careful handwriting spelling out truths that could indeed change everything. He thought about Harry and Meghan in their California home, probably putting their children to bed while half a world away their family agonized over how to reach across the gulf that separated them. He thought about his own children, growing up with only fragments of stories about their uncle, their understanding of family shaped by this ongoing silence. "There is no other way, is there?" William said finally. "This is it. This letter is our last chance to bring him home." "I believe so, yes," Charles admitted. "I've tried everything else. Public statements, private messages through intermediaries, even attempts to communicate through mutual friends. Nothing has worked. Harry has made it clear that he won't engage unless he knows the conversation will be genuinely different from all the ones that failed before." William understood. Harry had always been direct to a fault, unwilling to engage in the elaborate diplomatic dance that royal communication typically required. He needed honesty, even when that honesty was uncomfortable or politically inconvenient. The letter provided that honesty in abundance, perhaps more than anyone was prepared to handle. "There's something else," Charles said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The doctors want to do another round of scans next month. The treatment is going well, but there are some concerning developments. If this is my chance to make things right with Harry, it may be my only chance." The words hit William like ice water. His father's cancer had been caught early, the treatment had been aggressive and, apparently successful, but cancer was never truly defeated, only held at bay. The thought of losing Charles before the family could heal was unbearable, but the thought of healing the family by potentially destroying the monarchy felt equally impossible. "I need to think," William said. "Give me until tonight. I'll call you before 10. "Of course," Charles replied. "But, William? Whatever you decide, I want you to know that I understand the position this puts you in. I understand that I'm asking you to choose between your duty to the crown and your duty to our family. That's not a choice any father should force on his son." After hanging up, William sat in the growing darkness of his study, the letter illuminated only by his desk lamp. The palace around him hummed with its usual activity, staff preparing for evening events, security teams conducting their rounds, the machinery of monarchy continuing its ancient dance regardless of the personal dramas playing out behind closed doors. Catherine appeared in the doorway, her presence both comforting and jarring after the intensity of the past hours. "The children are asking about dinner," she said gently, but her eyes showed that she understood something significant was happening. After 13 years of marriage, she could read his moods as clearly as if he wore his thoughts on his face. "I'll be there in a few minutes," William said, but made no move to rise from his chair. Catherine entered the study fully, closing the door behind her. She had learned early in their relationship that royal life demanded discretion even within the family, that some conversations could only happen behind locked doors with trusted people. "Is it about Harry?" she asked. William nodded, gesturing to the letter. "Papa wants to send this. It's everything we've wanted him to say, everything Harry needed to hear. But, if it ever becomes public..." Catherine picked up the pages, scanning them quickly. William watched her face change as she read, saw the same mixture of relief and concern that he had experienced. When she finished, she set the letter down carefully, as if it were made of glass. "It would change everything," she said finally. "Not just for our family, but for the entire concept of what it means to be royal in the modern world. Yes, William agreed. The question is whether the change would be growth or destruction. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, her lawyer's mind clearly working through the implications. "What does your heart tell you?" she asked finally. William laughed bitterly. "My heart tells me to send the letter and, damn the consequences. My heart wants my brother back, wants my children to know their uncle, wants my father to die in peace knowing he tried everything to heal what he helped break." "And, your head?" "My head tells me that kings don't have the luxury of following their hearts. That the good of the many must outweigh the good of the few. That protecting the institution means protecting the values and stability it represents for millions of people who never asked to be affected by our family drama." Catherine reached across the desk and took his hand. "You know what I think," she said. "I think your father is right. I think the institution needs to be shaken up a bit. I think the world is changing so fast that we either adapt or we become irrelevant. And I think Harry deserves to read his father's words, whatever the cost." Her words settled over him like a benediction, giving voice to the choice his heart had already made but his mind had been afraid to acknowledge. William looked at the letter one more time, seeing it now not as a potential weapon against the monarchy but as a bridge back to the family they had always claimed to be. William spent the evening with his children, but his mind remained divided between their innocent chatter and the weight of the decision awaiting him. During dinner, George mentioned a documentary about California he'd watched at school, wondering aloud if Uncle Harry's house was near the beaches they'd seen on television. Charlotte asked why they couldn't visit America like other families did, her question carrying the kind of straightforward logic that made adult complications seem unnecessarily cruel. "Perhaps we will someday," William found himself saying, the words surprising him even as they left his mouth. Catherine caught his eye across the table, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth that suggested she understood the shift taking place in his thinking. After putting the children to bed, William returned to his study. The letter lay exactly where he had left it, but everything else about his perspective had changed. He called his father at exactly 9:30, knowing Charles would be waiting by the phone. "I think you should send it," William said without preamble. "Not because it's safe or smart or politically wise, but because it's true. And because Harry deserves the truth from us, even if we've been too afraid to offer it before." The relief in Charles's voice was audible. "Thank you," he said simply. "I know what this decision costs you." "Actually," William replied, "I think it might save me. I've spent so long trying to be the perfect heir that I'd forgotten what it means to be a good brother and son." They arranged for the courier to collect the letter first thing in the morning. Charles estimated it would reach Harry by Thursday afternoon California time, assuming all went smoothly with customs and delivery. The timeline felt both too fast and not fast enough, a window of possibility that could change everything or nothing, depending on how Harry chose to receive his father's words. Sleep came fitfully that night. William found himself alternating between relief at the decision made and anxiety about its consequences. He dreamed of childhood summers at Balmoral, of Harry's laughter echoing through ancient halls, of family photographs that no longer felt like historical artifacts but like promises of what might be possible again. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold, matching William's mood as he waited for news that would likely not come for hours yet. The courier service had confirmed delivery to Harry's Montecito home at 2:15 Pacific time, but there was no way to know when Harry might actually read the letter or how he might respond. William threw himself into his scheduled activities, attending a climate change summit in London and meeting with representatives from various environmental organizations. The work felt both important and trivial, meaningful in its global implications but somehow insignificant compared to the personal drama playing out behind the scenes. He found himself checking his phone compulsively, looking for messages that he knew were unlikely to come so soon. The first sign that something was wrong came at 4:30 London time, 9:30 in the morning in California. William's private secretary approached him during a break between meetings, her face carefully neutral but her eyes troubled. "Your Royal Highness," she said quietly, "there's been a development regarding the delivery to California. Perhaps we could speak privately?" William excused himself from the summit and followed her to a small conference room where two men in dark suits waited with the kind of serious expressions that usually preceded bad news. He recognized them as senior members of the Royal Protection Unit, the elite security team responsible for managing threats to the family. "Sir," the senior officer began, "we've received intelligence that suggests the letter you sent to Prince Harry yesterday may have been intercepted. Not by foreign agents or criminals, but by individuals within the California-based team that handles the Duke's correspondence." William felt his stomach drop. What kind of individuals? Security consultants, media advisors, legal representatives. People whose job it is to protect the Duke's interests, but who may not share your father's desire for family reconciliation. The implications hit William like a physical blow. Harry's team would see the letter not as a personal message from a father to his son, but as a potential public relations weapon or liability. They would analyze every word for its strategic value, consider how it might be used to advance or damage their client's position in ongoing negotiations with the palace. "Have they shown it to Harry?" William asked. "We don't know, sir. Our intelligence suggests they received the letter and have been discussing how to handle it, but we cannot confirm whether the Duke himself has seen the contents." William closed his eyes, seeing his father's vulnerable words being dissected by strangers who had no understanding of the pain and hope that had gone into writing them. The letter that had been meant as a private bridge between family members was now evidence in a complicated game of public relations and legal maneuvering. "There's more, sir," the second officer continued. "We have reason to believe that excerpts from the letter may be leaked to the media within the next 24 to 48 hours. The timing suggests it's being coordinated with other revelations designed to maximize impact." The room seemed to spin around William. His father's most vulnerable moments, his admissions of failure and expressions of love, would be splashed across front pages and dissected by commentators who saw them only as political ammunition. The healing gesture would become another weapon in the ongoing war between the Sussexes and the institution. "What are our options?" William asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Limited, sir. We could attempt to reach out directly to the Duke, bypassing his handlers, but that carries its own risks. We could prepare our own media strategy to contextualize the letter when it's released. Or..." The officer hesitated. "Or what?" "Or we could claim the letter was fabricated, that it represents a security breach rather than authentic correspondence. It would protect your father's reputation and the institution's stability, but it would also ensure that the Duke never receives his father's actual message." The suggestion hung in the air like poison. William could imagine the headlines, the accusations and counter-accusations that would follow. Harry would be left believing that his father's apparent attempt at reconciliation was actually an elaborate deception, another manipulation by the institution he had learned to distrust. William's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Charles. When he answered, his father's voice was tight with controlled panic. "William, I've just received a very disturbing call from my private secretary. There are rumors that the letter may have been compromised." "I'm aware, Papa. I'm meeting with security now to discuss our options." "What options?" "If that letter becomes public, it will destroy everything we've worked to build. Not just for our family, but for the monarchy itself." William heard the shift in his father's voice, the return of the king who had learned to prioritize institutional stability over personal desires. The vulnerable father who had written the letter was retreating behind walls of protocol and damage control. "You're having second thoughts," William observed. "I'm having third and fourth thoughts," Charles admitted. "When I wrote that letter, I was thinking only about healing our family. I wasn't considering the broader implications for the crown, for the government, for the Commonwealth realms that depend on the stability of our institution." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, but William could hear his father's resolve crumbling with each exchange. By the time they hung up, it was clear that Charles was leaning toward the nuclear option, toward claiming the letter was fraudulent and dealing with the family consequences later. William dismissed the security team and sat alone in the conference room, wrestling with a decision that seemed to have no right answer. Protect the institution and lose perhaps the last chance to heal his family, or risk everything for a reconciliation that might not even be possible anymore. His phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed an international number he didn't recognize, but, when he answered, Harry's voice came through clearly despite the distance.
"William?"
Harry said, and, for a moment he sounded exactly like the brother William remembered from childhood.
"We need to talk."
"I just read Papa's letter, and there are some things you need to know about what's happening on this end."
William's heart stopped.
Harry had the letter. He had read their father's words. The bridge was still possible, despite everything that had gone wrong with the delivery.
"Harry," William said, relief and apprehension warring in his voice. "Where are you calling from?"
"I'm in my car, driving to a secure location where we can talk without interference."
"William, the people around me want to use Papa's letter as ammunition.
They see it as validation of everything we've said about the family's dysfunction, proof that even Papa admits the institution failed us."
William felt something cold settle in his chest. "And what do you see it as?"
Harry was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight of sadness that transcended their years of conflict. "I see it as my father finally telling me he loves me more than he loves being king. But I also know that if this letter becomes public, it will destroy him and everything he's worked for. So I need to know, brother to brother, what you think we should do." The moment stretched between the brothers like a bridge spanning years of pain and misunderstanding. William gripped his phone tighter, afraid that if he loosened his hold even slightly, this fragile connection might dissolve back into the silence that had defined their relationship for so long.
"Where does Megan stand on all this?"
William asked, knowing that Harry's wife's perspective would be crucial to any decision they made. "She's the one who insisted I call you directly," Harry replied, surprising William completely. "When she read the letter, she cried. She said it reminded her of her father's attempts to reach out before he got sick, before pride and misunderstanding made reconciliation impossible. She doesn't want us to lose this chance." The revelation shifted something fundamental in William's understanding of the situation. For years, he had seen Meghan as the force pulling Harry away from the family, but perhaps she had always been trying to build bridges rather than burn them. Perhaps the failure had been in how the family had chosen to see her efforts.
"Harry," William said carefully, "if we can figure out a way to handle this properly, would you and Meghan consider coming to Balmoral? Papa suggested it in the letter, but after everything that's happened today."
"I want to," Harry said immediately. "God, William, I want to come home so badly it physically hurts sometimes.
But it has to be real this time.
No handlers, no protocols designed to manage us rather than heal us.
Just family figuring out how to be family again."
William looked around the sterile conference room where he had been planning damage control just minutes earlier.
The contrast between this institutional response and what Harry was asking for couldn't have been starker.
One approach focused on protecting the monarchy from the messiness of human emotion, the other demanded that they prioritize love over security.
"The media advisors," William said. "Both yours and ours. They're going to see this as a disaster no matter how we handle it."
"Then, maybe we stop letting them make our decisions for us," Harry replied.
"Maybe we remember that we're brothers before we're anything else, and act accordingly."
The simple statement cut through years of accumulated protocol and precedent like a knife through silk. William realized that somewhere in the process of becoming the perfect heir, he had forgotten the lesson their mother had tried so hard to teach them, that being royal meant serving others, not serving the institution that made them royal. "I need to make some calls," William said.
"Give me 2 hours. Can you keep your people from doing anything irreversible until then?"
"I can try. But, William, some of them are true believers in the cause. They see Papa's letter as the smoking gun they've been waiting for, proof that everything we've said about institutional dysfunction is true."
"And they're not wrong," William admitted. "But Papa isn't the institution.
He's a 75-year-old man with cancer who misses his son and wants to meet his grandchildren. If they use his vulnerability against him, they become the very thing they claim to be fighting against." Harry was quiet for a moment.
"You've changed," he said finally. "The William I left behind would never have admitted that the institution could be wrong about anything."
"The William you left behind was terrified of making mistakes," William replied. "I'm still terrified, but I'm more terrified of losing what's left of our family than I am of disappointing people who don't know us personally." After ending the call with Harry, William immediately contacted his father. Charles answered on the first ring, anxiety clear in his voice. "Harry called me," William said without preamble. "He's read the letter. He wants to come to Balmoral, but only if we can guarantee that this won't turn into another media circus or protocol negotiation." The silence on Charles's end stretched long enough that William began to worry they had been disconnected. When his father finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion.
"He wants to come home? He wants to try. But, Papa, we have to be different this time.
We have to choose being a family over being an institution, at least for this one conversation. The advisors won't like it," Charles said.
"Mine or his?
They'll see it as capitulation on both sides."
"Then, maybe it's time we stopped letting advisors run our family relationships," William replied, echoing Harry's earlier sentiment.
Charles laughed, a sound William hadn't heard from him in months. "You know, your mother said something very similar to me once. She said that if we couldn't figure out how to love each other without a committee of experts telling us how to do it, we probably didn't deserve to call ourselves a family." The next hour was a whirlwind of difficult conversations. William spoke with his private secretary, the head of royal communications, and 2 senior members of the royal household.
Each conversation followed a similar pattern: initial shock, detailed explanations of why the plan was risky, and, ultimately, reluctant agreement to support whatever the Prince of Wales decided. The hardest call was to Catherine.
She was attending a charity event in Birmingham, surrounded by photographers and well-wishers who had no idea that the royal family's future was being decided in real time behind the scenes. "You're sure about this?" she asked after he explained the situation. "I'm not sure about anything except that we have to try," William replied. "If this doesn't work, at least we'll know we gave love a chance to win over politics."
"Then, I support you completely," Catherine said without hesitation. "The children will be thrilled to finally meet their California cousins properly."
At exactly 6 o'clock London time, William called Harry back. His brother answered immediately, suggesting he had been waiting by the phone just as anxiously. "We're in," William said simply.
"Papa wants you at Balmoral as soon as you can arrange travel.
No media, no staff beyond essential security and household personnel.
Just family. And Meghan? The children? Especially Meghan and the children. Papa specifically asked for them to come." William could hear Harry's sharp intake of breath, followed by what sounded like muffled crying.
When Harry spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion.
"We'll be there next week. And, William? Thank you for choosing us over everything else. It couldn't have been easy."
"Actually," William replied, "it was the easiest decision I've made in years.
Everything else just felt like noise."
The arrangements came together with surprising speed once the decision was made. Harry and Meghan would fly privately to Scotland, avoiding the media circus that would accompany commercial travel. The Balmoral staff was given minimal information, told only that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex would be visiting with their children for a private family gathering. The letter that had started everything remained a secret between the 4 adults who had read it. Harry's media team was told only that the family had reached out privately and that all public statements should emphasize the Duke's gratitude for his father's outreach. Charles's advisors were informed that the king was pursuing a private reconciliation effort and that all media inquiries should be referred to a brief statement about the royal family's commitment to privacy during personal matters. 3 days later, William stood on the steps of Balmoral Castle, watching a black SUV wind its way up the long gravel drive. The Scottish Highlands stretched out around the castle in their autumn glory, the same landscape that had provided refuge and peace for the royal family for generations. Catherine stood beside him, their children barely able to contain their excitement at finally meeting their American cousins. Charles waited in the drawing room, too nervous to stand outside but too eager to remain completely hidden. At 75, after a lifetime of protocol and precedent, he was about to have perhaps the most important conversation of his reign. Not with world leaders or prime ministers, but with his own son. The SUV pulled to a stop, and Harry emerged first, looking older than in recent photographs but unmistakably himself.
Meghan followed, holding Lilibet while Archie peered out curiously at the ancient castle that represented so much of his father's complicated history.
For a moment, the two brothers simply looked at each other across the gravel courtyard. Then, Harry smiled, the same mischievous grin that had gotten them both into trouble during countless childhood adventures, and William found himself smiling back. "Hello, brother," Harry said as they embraced, and William realized that some bridges, once burned, could indeed be rebuilt if both sides were willing to do the work.
"Welcome home," William replied, and meant it completely.
Inside the castle, Charles waited with his heart in his throat, holding a small wrapped gift for each of his grandchildren and hoping against hope that love might finally be enough to heal what duty had broken. The letter that had started this journey lay safely locked away, its vulnerabilities and admissions having served their purpose not by being shared with the world, but by being shared between family members who had forgotten how to trust each other with the truth. Outside, the Scottish wind carried the sound of children's laughter as cousins met for the first time, their joy unmarked by the complicated history that had kept them apart. In that laughter was the promise that the next generation might inherit something better than the conflicts that had defined their parents' relationships.
The healing would not be immediate or complete.
There would be difficult conversations ahead, careful negotiations about roles and responsibilities, and always the challenge of balancing personal happiness with public duty. But, for the first time in years, the royal family had chosen love over fear, connection over control, and the possibility of growth over the safety of stagnation. As the last light of the Scottish autumn faded behind the mountains, the family gathered in the drawing room where Charles finally met his grandchildren properly, where old wounds began the slow process of healing, and where a letter filled with a father's love accomplished something that years of political maneuvering could not. It brought his children home.